welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar Podcast. I am your host, Clayton. Going around the table, we have...
I'm Jordan.
I'm Beth.
KD.
KP.
Haley.
And today, our goal is going to be to make Jordan talk as much as possible. We're going to be talking about the role-playing game that he developed, Apocalyptia, and gaining some insight as to his thought processes and why he made the game the way that he did. And hopefully, if we have time, we're going to talk a little bit about a campaign that most of us here, participated in, the Apocalyptia Factions game that very nearly tore some friendships apart. and we've had some vows of revenge.
It's gonna happen. Cool.
I just want to say that I was invited to an orgy last night. I did not go.
Why not?
No, we have to talk about Apocalyptia.
I want to know.
Tell us your stuff, Jordan.
So how do you come up with Apocalyptia?
Is that the prompt question?
Yeah,
to go on.
Let's start with that. Why did you make Apocalyptia?
I started putting a game together. I think it was around 2009 or 10, and it was originally supposed to be a homebrew of Fallout. I was playing a lot of Fallout 3 at the time, and my friend circle was as well. And so I tried to mimic the special system as a percentile-based role-playing game as closely as possible. And then over the course of the next year or so, I decided that I wanted to make just a kind of general-purpose post-apocalyptic game that wasn't branded with Fallout stuff. I took a lot of the really crazy, wacky things out that are the signatures of the Fallout world and tried to make it as brutally realistic as I possibly could. So yeah, that was the beginning of it. And it wasn't, I think it was probably like maybe 2 more years before I got rid of the percentile system and decided to go with the D6, because percentile systems are really hard to have very many modifiers in the system and then keep the math simple for players. I went with the simplest possible dice mechanic that I could think of in order to make it easy for new players to pick up quickly.
So, you've mentioned that you use a D6. Kind of strip down what is the core mechanic of Apocalyptia.
I intentionally was trying to not reinvent the wheel, and so I took the same basic formula that most role-playing games have that have a single die resolution. You just have your D6 that you roll, and then you add whatever your relevant modifiers are, subtract whatever penalties you have, and that is your result. To make it more interesting than just that, I also put in the botch mechanic, where if you roll a 1, you roll the die again. If you roll 2 1s in a row, then something catastrophically bad happens. On the other side, if you roll a 6, you get to keep rolling that 6. It keeps exploding to get as high a roll as you can. I always thought that D&D was kind of silly with the 1 in 20 chance of something really terrible happening, because it seems like really gonzo things happen more often than what is reasonable. 1 out of 36 seems like it's a little more palatable to me. And then I wanted there to be a way that no matter who is trying something and no matter how bad they might be at something, there is a slim chance that they could just absolutely blow away a series of rolls and do something, astronomical despite the odds. So that's why the open-ended exploding thing is there.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned the essentially 1 in 36 chance of a complete botch. Mm-hmm. Has luck always been in the game? Because luck is a way of mitigating that. So the chances really aren't 1 in 36 as long as you have luck.
Right. Luck in its current form, where it's a currency that you spend to do things, that was not always there. Like I said, it used to be a Fallout game, and in that, the L in special is luck, and so it used to just be one of your main attributes. But when I totally reworked the system, I wanted there to be something that the players could spend when things were terrible. That's one of the things that I don't like about D&D, is that you're pretty much totally at the mercy of the dice at any given time. And I wanted the players to have some way, some resource to manage that reflected how much effort that they wanted to put into doing a given thing. And so there are lots of other games that have something like this. Savage Worlds has bennies. They're similar. I was playing a lot of the Star Wars Revised D20 at the time, and they have force points that you can spend to do similar sorts of things. So I really wanted that to be in there. I always appreciate that in a game system.
Sticking on luck, why did you make the decision to have luck refresh at dawn in the game day rather than at the end of a session or at the beginning of a session just luck refreshes? Because as it is right now, it is possible to go through several days in a session, or you can take an entire campaign and have it be done in the span of a 24-hour period, and those characters essentially have one pool of luck throughout the entire campaign.
Mm-hmm. The reason for this, it's trying to go along with the theme of, you know, your standard, like, Night of the Living Dead zombie movie kind of thing. That the typical time scale of Apocalyptia is almost like a moment by moment living in this character's life. There are circumstances where you speed through some things or whatever, but I wanted the game to feel like you were there for every beat in a character's life. And in those movies, you know, they're basically just holding out until the dawn all the time. You know, the zombies are breaking in the windows, they're doing everything they possibly can to stay alive. And then for whatever reason, once the sun cracks over the horizon, then everybody feels better. Everything's like, all right, we're going to make it. You know, you get a second wind or whatever. And, you know, anybody that's ever seen a sunrise, you know what that feels like. So I just wanted that to be.
I haven't seen one in 5 years.
If I'm allowed to ask a question, going on the topic of that last night on Earth feel, one of the things that I love about Apocalyptia is that how you can mold it to be really whatever you want depending on the situation. How did you decide on a certain number or type of apocalypses that could happen? Because there's like robot apocalypse, I think, alien invasion, zombies, other such things. If you could like go into detail, if you like had a list or you had a bunch of people come together and collaborate on that.
I made a list of all of the distinct causes of a societal collapse that I could think of. And the numerical underpinnings of the whole Apocalyptia system all have to do with like multiples of 3, mostly multiples of 6, so that it's easy to roll anything you want randomly on the D6. And so that's why I went with 12 apocalypse scenarios. You know, you roll once even odd, roll the D6 again, that'll give you one of those random scenarios. I wanted the whole thing to be easy to spontaneously generate anything that the game has to offer. So that's why I set 12, and then when I started thinking through it, I really can't think of any common apocalypses that are not represented on the list. There might be something, but I can't think of it. So that's the short answer, I guess.
Brief but related segue question. We've been playing Apocalyptia together, most of us, for a couple of years. And have you seen any scenarios or settings that we've created as DMs with your system that you just thought would never happen? Just a wacky idea or a wacky scenario. We had an 11-person one-shot the other night. That was pretty nuts, and you said you had never seen anything quite like that.
That was huge, and also weird because, you know, it was not at all the kind of thing that the game is meant for. It's, you know, in space and time travel. We didn't get much to, like, using the system at all. I don't think anybody made a roll in that whole game, so
Couple. Nothing major.
Yeah, the one that really surprised me was your Mars game, because I had nothing in here for any kind of space stuff at all, and I was pretty impressed with how well that came together.
Do you want to give like a brief thing about the Mars game?
Briefly, it was called The Narine 9, a Mars murder mystery. We had 9 players, or it was designed for 9 players. And one thing I really admire about Apocalyptia is, in fact, the tables you can roll on. You roll 2d6, and there's your apocalypse. You roll 3d6, and there's the random item you find in the abandoned lows. Something I created for the Mars murder mystery was a table where the setup was, it is a 10-person research small colony on Mars, meant to sustain itself for about a year, and the colony commander is found dead. So 9 players and then 1 dead commander. And the table I created was for each of the 9, ideally, players to roll for what kind of seemingly guilty evidence that they might have against them that would pin them as the murderer. And so I created a table of basically altercations you could have with the murdered, with the deceased. Some of them were a private altercation. Some of them were public. There was one sort of branch in the tree. Some of them were harsh words, a lover's tryst that went sour, all sorts of, archetypes and stereotypes like that. But back to your game, that is something I really admire about this system. It's just the sheer amount of randomness that can come from rolling on these tables, all using just your D6. It's very cool.
And I'd say that what you've got is a very good basis for a very strong generic system. And as Kyle demonstrated, it doesn't take much stretching at all to make this fit into wildly different scenarios that it wasn't designed for.
That's what I was hoping for. One of the things that was important to me about this game when I was making it was that I wanted it to be open source as much as possible and general purpose as much as possible. So, I put it out there for, free, pay what you want. And I wanted to not lock it into a specific way that the game has to be played in the way that lots of systems are. And you sacrifice a lot when you make a game that way. There's a lot of great games that are really, really good at the one thing that they do. There's some give and take that had to happen, but I wanted anybody to be able to grab the game and make whatever they wanted out of it and not feel like they were bound by anything that I set in stone to begin with. So I wanted the whole thing to be very modular. I don't want anything to feel forced or, use as little or as much of the rules as you like. We've run some pretty slim Apocalyptia games where we're barely getting into the rules at all, just to, use surface level skills, not really worrying about abilities or any of the details of gear or, situational rules or whatever. And I just wanted to make a vehicle for people to be able to roleplay real quick, snappy, get to the stuff that people like and not be bogged down by rules and weird particularities.
There's a very interesting dynamic within the game book itself of there are many aspects of the game that are very old school, like all the charts, all the random encounters, everything that you have to roll for, everything that a game master could conceivably need in a session. There is a chart in there for it, and every single item that is in that book gives some sort of a mechanical benefit or penalty. Is there anything that you set out to do in Apocalyptia that you just couldn't find in any other game systems, or that you weren't happy with what they were doing in any other systems?
I couldn't find it in one system. I've played a ton of different systems, and basically every system I've ever played had something that I really, really liked about it. And I think what I was trying to do is just take the best of my entire role-playing experience and try to distill it into one thing. And this game very well may not be for everybody. I'm sure there's lots of players that, would think it's too crunchy or, want something different. But as far as my style of gaming goes, this is the stuff that I always want to see in a role-playing game. And if it wasn't there, I figured out how to put it in there. So yeah, I really like games that reward people for thinking through their plan and having a realistic conception of what they're trying to do. I like games that punish players for doing stupid things, for being too brazen, for just thinking that, I'll just charge in and win the day because I'm the hero and the system's built for me to win no matter what happens. And I think that's boring and predictable. And so I wanted a game that really made people think, and I really tried to make this as realistic as possible. I did tons of research on real world stuff, so like down to like what the miles per gallon is on a given vehicle, or like for all the weapons, I went through and found what the actual like foot-pounds of force is for each caliber of ammunition, and all of those are consistent with the damage that's given. It's all scaled appropriately. And so, in addition to just being a fun game to play, I kind of hoped that in a way it would work in the same way that those Army field manuals do. That's why I took the style of that there's stuff you can learn about the actual world by flipping through this thing. It's not going to help you, take apart a car and put it back together, but it gives you a sense of how things actually work in a lot of ways. There's not a lot that's over the top fictional about it. I want it to be really gritty and realistic.
I know we've touched on this a little bit in the previous session, but that's another reason why I like this system so much, is that someone who has an idea of how the real world works but doesn't know much about role-playing games, i.e. my parents, I ran a 2 sessions with my parents who are in their 60s and have never played a pen and paper role-playing game in their entire life, and they loved it. And we've had lots of players come in who had never really gamed before, and definitely not with this system, and they've taken to it pretty well. I think that you can see a lot of, I know how the world works, I know what this might do, I know what I want to do, and lo and behold, there's a thing in Apocalyptia. I can do that. Great.
So I'm just personally curious now, because you said that you like games that punish people for doing stupid stuff, and my character on Wednesday, we were playing a kind of a hybrid between Apocalyptia and like a Star Trek game. And I played this girl who was just basically a gun nut from West Virginia and thought she was great at everything, but really was only great at like 1 or 2 things. So there came a situation where there was a replicator to be fixed, and she'd fixed a fridge before, so she thought for sure she'd fix this replicator. And I was like, I can do it. I'm great at building things. And I actually had a 0. But I ended up rolling a 5, so I fixed it, you know. So I was kind of doing something really stupid, but it still worked out.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of curious if that, like, kind of goes again, if you were like, oh my god, that didn't work out, or what.
No, because people have dumb luck all the time. People fumble into success constantly. I mean, look at our president.
I think it's definitely more of like making dumb decisions, like for example how I got assassinated, because I walked out without anybody else into the middle of the woods at night with a stranger, because my logic was it'll just be like a short, like I'll get some information, I'll come back with my people, I don't want anybody to like suspect that we're spying on them, and I'm really good at few things, like really good at few things. Being smart, thinking things through is not one of them. So, I definitely got punished via death, but then turns out it was a setup, so I was not gonna win anyway.
You would have gone out there with, half a dozen or more of your faction. It might not have played out that way.
I know, but I'm an idiot. You keep forgetting this, KP.
Like, you could have definitely won that setup.
Oh, 100%. I would have kicked your ass because I'm an Amazon, and I was awesome.
Well, they also only had close-range weapons.
We didn't have... Yeah, we were pretty shooty. We were pretty, like, pound your face in.
I had a tank. I could have run your village over anyway.
My farm. My farm.
They had a pretty cool farm.
Is that our transition?
Farm. Also, you had
I still have some rules questions that I want to...
All right, shelve this, Hayley. Right. We're coming back.
Before we get into that, I want to say something to Hayley, though. I think that you unfortunately just tripped onto something that is one of my biases when I design the game. You've got, a lot of theater background, but when it comes to games, my style is very tactical, and I don't have a lot of respect for, the literary assumptions of a lot of games that, you're going to have this encounter and this is going to be the scene and you're going to learn a useful thing and move on and blah, blah, blah. Like, life is so much more dangerous and messy and not scripted like that. And, I made a game where you have to watch your back all the time, and you can't just assume that this is going to be the next scene that's going to lead to this other thing.
But also, it's the most realistic thing. I'm going to die at the apocalypse. This is what we've learned from your game. I'm just really trusting and naive and, like, made for, like, scripted scenarios where I can talk my way out of things.
So does this game reflect your real-life paranoia?
Yeah.
Ask a simple question.
Ask and ye shall receive.
Turning it over back to Clayton. Sorry to, like, take a swerve.
Just a comment. One thing that I have learned by being on both sides of this inside the game is, by the rules, if you are the one walking into an ambush, you are fucked. There is almost, if you walk blindly into an ambush, you are going to get, if not killed, you are going to get horribly, horribly maimed, and most of the people around you are going to get killed. If you manage to set up an ambush, it doesn't matter. As long as the people setting up the ambush have enough firepower to get through the armor of the armored personnel characters that happen to be coming down the line, you can take out a force that is vastly more powerful than what your force is. And that's just one of the things that I love, because that does kind of mirror the real world, in that in war, you want to be the one in cover taking pot shots at an enemy who doesn't know that where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm. Something I think that's interesting, and I'm assuming it was a design choice, is just how more visceral the combat feels. I think back to that the Cosmic Armageddon game that we played, and there was that point where KP's character was in a net in the bathroom, and I was knife fighting that cultist.
That was a dumb decision I made. You know what, guys? Like, there's not enough sleeping room in the car. I'm just going to go sleep in the bathroom.
Wake me up when it's morning.
And so Jan goes in and just curls around a toilet, a non-functional porcelain throne. And lo and behold, I wake up in a fucking tiny net, cultists all around me, like weird serrated daggers, and, well, that was that.
But, I think that was
I was shit out of luck.
Wasn't.
Wait, did Jan die?
No, Jan did not die. Thankfully, his good buddy Julian burst in and then also proceeded to get stabbed, but stabbed the other guy harder. Winky face, I guess. But
there's always a bigger fish.
Tangent aside, the combat feels very, close. Mm-hmm. I guess there's not really. I mean, unless you're out there in what's that armor called? The Interceptor armor, and you got like a 50 cal, and you're sniping people. Like then the difference in level.
So you're Ezra taking on a dude with 2 chainsaw arms. I mean,
oh man,
God, that was cool.
That was awesome. Or the Amazonian fight where we braided each other's hair naked before you kicked the shit out of me.
Oh, that was pretty cool.
That was awesome.
But exactly what you're saying. In that fight, we had 2 player characters sparring. Not intending to kill, not intending to maim, literally naked, no armor whatsoever, no clothing either. And I knew in this visceral close-up fight, which I've never been in a fight in my real life, but I assume it would be like this, I was going to go for your head or your eyes. Pocket sand. I didn't use pocket sand.
To be fair, I also had razor blades braided into my hair as weapons, and you were afraid of that.
Should have been disqualified on technicality.
Excuse me, so I took some and braided them into your hair, and it just became a battle ritual.
It was pretty cool.
It was awesome.
But just like that, it's a very close-up, visceral fight where you get one good hit in, and then the person who has been hit is taking pain penalties to everything they do, a -1 or more, and that could be it.
There's not really a level discrepancy, which I like a lot. There's, and again, assuming that's a design choice, that fight with Julian and the cultists in the bathroom, like, it could have definitely gone either way, and I took a lot of damage that kind of set me back a little bit for a couple sessions in that fight. Mm-hmm. And it felt close. Like I was kind of on the edge of my seat, sort of being like, okay, he's gonna come at me. Like I don't know if my dodge is good enough, and then I'm gonna take pain penalties next turn. I don't know if I can stab him back. But then you compare that to some D&D games. Right? I was in a 5th edition game in which I was a Storm Cleric, where I'm like every turn, all right, I cast lightning. My turn again? Okay, get a storm clouds. I cast lightning. Oh, is it my turn? Hey guys, new concept here. I cast lightning.
Kyle, briefly, before I forget, I want to remind you, your character's name was Julian, but I've trained you to say Julian because of Jan's accent.
It's true.
You just
I've been conditioned. Long story short, did you want to avoid that kind of repetitiveness?
Absolutely. I got so bored with D&D, especially 4th edition, just being bags of hit points. You're just in this game of attrition, seeing who runs out first, and it never really feels like there's anything at stake until you're down to just a handful of hit points in systems like that. And it doesn't feel like a conflict in real life. People shy away from violence because violence is fucking dangerous, and it can go either way really easily. And I was never in the military or anything like that, but I spent a lot of time reading Army field manuals, reading like war journals and stuff. When I started really rewriting the system, I just read Che Guevara's diary of the Cuban Revolution, and he was talking about stuff like this, like just random things pop off in war, and the people who have the best preparation, the best setup, like you were talking about, way weighted in their favor. And that's how they did it. That's how they overthrew, a dictatorship that was way more well supplied than they were. They just played smart over and over and over again. And, I wanted a game system that was like that. And also he talked about how, they're in a firefight with some guys, and his best buddy that he was just having a great conversation with the night before around the campfire, that dude's head explodes because a random rifle round goes through it, and that guy's done. You can't do that in D&D. There's just too many hit points. Things are too safe. Like,
you got to factor in armor. Then you got to factor in, I have this feat here that lets me dodge this specific attack or spell.
And even then, you take 12 damage. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
My next turn, I can go ahead and attack fully. I'm fine.
Even if you do a cold shot, I feel like it doesn't hinder you too much.
So. Not for the payoff, but games like that are simulating video games, and I didn't want to simulate a video game. I wanted to simulate real-life bloody combat.
Which is ironic, since it started off as a Fallout homebrew.
Based on D&D's history, I think video games are simulating games like that. But
yeah.
The guy, the hypothetical situation you just mentioned, where the dude's friend dies, before anybody thinks that Apocalyptia is this incredibly, difficult, gritty, you're gonna die every session game. Mm-hmm. In that situation, you would give your friend a point of luck, and he would make the roll to not get hit in the head. Mm-hmm. And that is something else I love about this game, is the comrades mechanic, where you add them to your list. Now you can share luck. If they are on your list, you can give them a point of luck. And if they die, however, still despite all odds, it's a risk by putting them on your list. Can you talk more about that? Is that cool?
Yeah. You have your comrade list, and it takes a while in-game if you meet a new character to get to know them well enough to be on your comrade list, and it takes quite a bit to get them off your comrade list. And if you do lose them through falling out, or if they die or whatever, you lose a point of psyche, at least temporarily. Psyche's fairly fluid. But what I originally had it set up to where there was a limit on how many comrades anybody could have, that based on, I think it was your demeanor, it was how many people you could really have that close to you. But then I decided to get rid of that. It's probably the most sentimental part of the game, and the one that lets reality kind of slip aside a little bit. But I don't know, friends are important, and watch Band of Brothers. That's the comrade system. That's what I was going for there, really. Is just making it, like you were saying, there's a big advantage to having people close to you. There's also a huge risk to having people close to you. So you could theoretically do, lone wolf stuff, and never put yourself out there and only worry about yourself. You might do it right, you might not. I don't know. There's a lot of ways to play this game.
I would say that the comrade system, and when we're talking about the comrade system, we have to talk about the psyche system, because it's so intertwined. Despite what you just said, I feel that it's the opposite, that it is that part is really closely mimicking real life as well. Because, I mean, I know I would be devastated if something happened and one of the people sitting around this table who just suddenly was dead.
I didn't mean that was unrealistic. I meant just the throwing mechanical bonuses because your friends, it's simulating something that's real to us that we all feel, but that's a little squishier and harder to simulate. With
This
physics.
just in, emotions.
It's okay to have feelings, Jordan.
So, whenever I first started playing the system, there wasn't really a whole lot to Psyche. Basically, Psyche was something that you put it where you thought it made sense for your character, and then you just lost Psyche whenever comrades died. And that was pretty much the Psyche system at the time. And since then, it's gotten a whole lot more robust. When and why did you start introducing those parts into Apocalyptia?
Well, I started coming up with little things as I was expanding the book, especially when I got into like settlements and stuff like that, that were more like social things. And there started being a few little things that would pop up that I could see giving bonuses or penalties to Psyche. And so it was just kind of begging for more of a system to be there. Like, for instance, if you go into a settlement, if you get a shave and a bath, that gives you a point of Psyche back, because that's something you always see in Old West movies. People are tired of, riding around on the prairie. They go in, they get their bath, and then and a shave, and they feel like a new man. So I wanted there to be mechanical incentives to do stuff like that. There's also cultists in town that'll be, preaching some crazy thing. And if you really sit there and get enthralled in what they're saying and they start getting in your head, it starts deteriorating your psyche. And, there was lots of stuff for brainwashing and torture and stuff like that it needed more to Psyche than just an off the cuff, self-assessment of things. And you really helped me out a ton with the Psyche table that gives the bonuses and penalties to things. At least half of that was your suggestions. I really appreciate that. And then when we started coming up with the psychotic break, I think that's really cool. There wasn't a whole lot like that before, but now you get to see a character actually melt down in some totally unpredictable way. And
Yeah.
I would like to play more games that have a lot of that stuff going on in it, because I don't feel like we've tested it out enough, or not even testing it, just experienced it enough. I think it's going to be really cool when we get way into that.
Mm-hmm. I feel like recently in Apocalyptia anyway, maybe it's because of the size of our group, we never seem to run out of luck, so we rarely seem to botch, so bad things like that cause psychotic breaks happen far less frequently.
Well, what about the bomb at the Bolshatri? A lot of us lost thing. I had a psychotic break.
That's the one instance I can think of for sure, but even botches seem to be happening less, and I wonder if it's because of group size. I don't know.
It is because of group size. The game is intended to be maximum of 6 players in the party, and we've been playing with 8 or 9 or 11 people.
It's because we're such good friends.
I like that the larger your group, the stronger you are, and the less likely that bad things happen. That ties into that what we were just talking about. I wonder if a geographic distance on the ability to give luck within the game or something. So if our 9-person huge ass party is split 4 one place, 5 another place,
it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense. Oh, sorry, Clayton. You can go ahead if you want.
Go ahead.
It wouldn't make a whole lot of sense if you're real good friends with that person, but if they're off in Idaho, and you're off doing a mission in Ohio.
Well, that distance is often what can crumble even a very good friendship.
Mm-hmm. So it would be hard to press for you to be like, oh, well, I send him some luck, Western Union it.
That's a great idea. I'm going to throw something in about a range on that in the next revision. I've thought about that before, but most of the time when we're playing, we're all, doing platoon level tactics stuff, but you're right. There needs to be something like that.
Yeah. Maybe even just it be a function of leadership, where you have to roll to successfully give the point of luck to your friend. And then penalties to that roll might be if if the receiving character has been deafened by gunfire. They can't hear the words of inspiration.
That's there is already a thing for that.
Leadership already has something built in similar, but it's not specifically sending a point of luck.
Yeah, and in Courage, it'll give you a bonus to the stuff you're doing. There used to be one, I can't remember if it's still there. Maybe I took it out, something that gives a point of luck back. I did recently put in a new thing under medicine, a new specialty for psychiatry, where you can give people a point of psyche back. It's hard to do, and it takes a long time, but you can sit there and talk things out with people and try to piece their mind back together a little bit. But yeah, that's the kind of stuff that I like about the social skills in this game. It's not just, I'm gathering information. I'm, lying to somebody. I want there to still be some mechanical stuff happening with any social encounters that are going on as well.
I have a whole bunch of just little questions that we've kind of skirted around and not quite asked the entirety of the questions. So I'm going to kind of just go back and hit some of those.
Sure.
The art in the book, where has that come from?
A lot of it came out of military field manuals, straight out of it. A lot of the combat section illustrations and stuff, because I just love that style of, just ink drawings. It's so rough and raw looking. And then I spent a lot of time combing the web for stuff that was public domain, Creative Commons, whatever. Grabbing stuff where I could, old illustrations out of really old books. A bunch of the skill and trait icons that are next to those things come from National Park Service signs. If you've got, an archery range somewhere, they're going to use the same icon that I used for the range skill, or the riding dude on Tame. And then as it goes further back into the book, that's a lot more Creative Commons stuff, and I ran it all through filters to make it look a lot grainier and rough black and white. I wanted to give the feel of a book that had been Xeroxed a couple of different times and, is as torn up as the world is. There are three illustrations in the book that my friend Jason Hager made, and he was really awesome way early on in this to help me out. The dude that's illustrating armor, that was his, and also that really awesome picture, probably my favorite picture in the book, is the vehicle chase in the vehicle section, the guy in the SUV trying to shoot at the bikers that are coming up on him with the semi-truck behind him. That was Jason, and Jason also designed the Apocalyptia logo, and he did a hell of a job on that. And then everything else I just kind of pieced together with GIMP. I used open source software for everything, so it was all made in LibreOffice, and I used the graphical image manipulation program GIMP for all the artwork, and the whole thing was made on Linux. So this is about as open source a role-playing game as I could possibly have put together.
Some of the art that I love the most are the pictures that you've taken from the Army field manuals, and then used the scatter color tool to make it
the spray can.
The spray can to make it look like they're zombies, and they've just started degenerating.
That was fun. That was some of the earliest art that I made for this thing, and that was when I first made the game. It didn't have separate scenarios. It was one gigantic mega apocalypse that had elements of every one of these apocalypses in it. So all kinds of shit were hitting the fan simultaneously. But, as I moved on, I just left that stuff there. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with the art, but I'd really like to have more original art in it. If any listeners want to donate some art, I would really appreciate it, and I'll definitely give you credit, but I can't pay you.
Pay you in emotions.
You'll pay them in exposure.
Yeah.
It's gonna be a good opportunity, kid. Just get in here.
Wow, that sounded like Creepy Van.
Yeah.
Like a mobster in a creepy van.
You want to be a movie star?
I can make you famous. You just gotta come in here.
Did I stutter?
Jordan, what was the choice, or why did you make the choice to call the person running the game narrator? Why didn't you go with the more standardized, just game master or some variant?
Because it's fucking arrogant. I've always hated that dungeon master. What a nerdy fucking thing to call a person. For one thing, I think it's just flatly unrealistic to say that there is one person that's making a game happen, and that's what game master sounds like. Mm-hmm. When you're sitting at a table with 7 people there, one of them is presenting a story, but there are 6 other people contributing to that story, and so, I just wanted to call it what it was, and that person is a narrator.
I've never known that. That's actually a really cool thing. I'm sure most of you listeners and table friends alike are familiar with the common media, Hollywood air quotes, representation of tabletop RPGs, D&D. The episode of Community comes to mind where they play D&D. In just about every representation in popular media, it's always one person, this megalomaniac, who can do anything at any time that they want to their players with no repercussions, and somehow their players stick around. And I've actually encountered real-life people who shy away from games like this because literally they'll be like, isn't that the thing where, like, the person running it can just do whatever they want and just throw stuff at you? I'm not interested in that.
Mm-hmm. I've encountered the same thing. I've got a good friend from high school who I've tried time and again to get him into role-playing games. And he's always like, well, but if I'm a player, what's to prevent the game master from just dropping the ceiling on me?
Right.
Mm. I hate that. I really despise that. And that's one thing that, I get really passionate and idealistic about is, and that's one reason why I'm glad we're doing this podcast, frankly, is in dissipating some of those just really stupid stereotypes.
Also, if you have an ornate game screen, just don't use it.
That's one of the things I respect World of Darkness for, as well as calling them storytellers instead of game masters. You're not a master of anything. Shut up.
We've already touched a little bit about your philosophy behind the hit points. What made you choose to go for location-based hit points?
That's one of the main artifacts of it starting out as a Fallout game. The VAT system in Fallout is one of the coolest things I've ever seen in a role-playing game, and I really wanted to give players that experience. When I first started, players had action points, and I had this really complicated list of like what you could do in a round and spend your action points, and they, regenerate at such and such a rate. And I wanted to give the simulation of, all right, 2 shots to the leg and 1 shot to the arm and whatever, like you do in that game. But that was way too cumbersome. In just about every role-playing game I've ever played, there's been some situation where I want to hit an enemy in a particular spot for a particular reason. And at least half the games don't have a built-in way of doing that makes any sense or is of any effect.
And it just goes back to you saying you were wanting to just simulate real life rather than a video game, because almost every game system that I've played, it is incredibly difficult to lose a limb. Mm-hmm. In Apocalyptia, you're more likely to lose a limb than die. And that very much parallels what happens in real modern warfare. People with the Purple Heart, they're coming back and they've got holes in them.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And that's why, cops and soldiers, they shoot for center of mass because that's when you're most likely to hit your target. But when you're just randomly shooting at somebody, you're not sitting there taking time to aim every single location. You don't know where it's going to land. And anytime you're shooting a weapon at somebody, there's a chance that you're going to randomly hit them in the head and then the fight's going to be over with. So that was another thing that I wanted to make combat really dangerous. If you're not aiming your shot and you're at, a normal shooting range, you roll on a random location to see where it hits. And everybody knows that going into it, that there's a chance in the first round somebody might get lucky and get me in the melon and then it's done. And so, that's cool. I didn't want people to just rush into stuff. I wanted them to really think about it.
What made you choose to make armor as damage reduction rather than just something that prevents you from getting damaged at all?
Again, it's more realistic. When people get shot and they have like Kevlar on, usually they'll get really bruised up, or they might, have a rib broke or something. They don't just shrug it off. It doesn't just bounce off of you unnoticed. I wanted it to wear down over time, again, because it's realistic, and that's, a theme of post-apocalyptic fiction, is that stuff has to be actively kept up. Things, entropy is a constant force, and that goes for mundane physical items, and also just the consistency of civilization itself. Like, it takes work. You have to keep building things back up because the tendency is to fall apart.
And for damage itself, why don't we roll for damage? Why is damage always a static number? It kind of negates the possibility of a graze.
Mm-hmm. The one reason is because it's just faster. I wanted combat to be really quick, and I didn't want each turn to be a long, drawn-out set of things. And I thought one of the quickest ways I could speed things up is cut the number of dice that need to be rolled in half. Yeah, realistically, if I was really wanting to get super realistic about it, I'd probably have a different die type for every weapon. But I think the trade-off there is the random location stuff. Because bullets especially, they're made standardized. You have the same grain counts, same amount of powder, same, bullet size in each standardized caliber. So that's the point. They're made on an assembly line. So every 9mm you shoot is going to be about the same amount of foot-pounds hitting a thing. So the random element is where it hits you. Yeah, there isn't anything for a graze, but I had to make some kind of sacrifice to make it fast. If people wanted to, they could definitely assign die types and have twice as long a game, but that's not what I was wanting to run, really.
Mm-hmm. As we've mentioned, there are a lot of charts in Apocalyptia. For those charts and for those tables, what would you say was harder, coming up with items to fill the list, or deciding that you have too many items and you've got to cut things out? Which is harder?
They're both hard. The hardest part was probably cutting them, because there's just tons of things that could fall into this. The thing that was really hard was weighing a few different items against each other and trying to think of it as a player, that if I was rolling randomly and I rolled this number, would I rather have this thing or that thing? And so I tried to pick a list of items that would be useful, and some of them suck on purpose. Nobody's happy when they get the egg timer or whatever, but the egg timer can help you make a time bomb.
And also a perfect souffle.
Or just a distraction, get it 10 seconds and throw it somewhere. When the bell goes off, run. I wanted everything to have something clever about it. But yeah, especially with the whole post 9/11 tactical thing that happened in the economy, with the all the companies making stuff for war, and the whole prepper thing. You can spend days, and I spent months online looking at all the little gadgets. But I had to think about what is just laying around in America. What are you likely to just find if you start going through drawers? So I don't know. I probably spent most of my time on the gear. The locations, the descriptions of each thing, a lot of work went into the gear.
So I have found a few Easter eggs in amongst all the gear. Things that I'm sure you put in there just and were giggling gleefully as you put them in there, or hid them in the book. Is there any item that you're just most proud of for putting it in there? Or for putting it in there and giving it the mechanical bonus that you gave it?
Most proud of single item? I don't know, man. There's a lot of weird ones. What did you find? Tell me what.
The one that I found was the teddy bear. It is an item that gives you a +1 bonus to your luck that is available per day. But the teddy bear is not on any Master Gear List rule tables. It's not on any findable tables. The only way to get a teddy bear is to get it from an orphan.
You're a monster.
Jordan, are you condoning robbing orphans?
No. I'm just saying a teddy bear is just a teddy bear until a child puts his love into it.
Oh. Moral of the story, everyone. The teddy bear was the friend you made along the way.
Yeah, that was a funny one. Well, for that, I was thinking, like, I wanted to have an orphan character, but how in the hell did this little kid stay alive through all of this stuff? And so I came up with the teddy bear as just being, like, a mechanical way to explain, like, he's got his teddy looking out for him, and so he's made it through, you know, hid where he had to, and whatever, just got lucky.
And then I look at it and I take it way too dark.
Yeah, you look at it and think, I need a teddy bear.
I need the best gear no matter how I get it.
It's my blood-soaked teddy. Gives me +1 luck.
God.
Soaked in the innocent blood of orphans.
Oh my god.
Something, murdering younglings, something.
The women, the children.
There are a few unique items like that, rare items that only NPCs have. I took that from Fallout as well, because that game's full of, you know, weird quest items that you can only get off of one character. The barbarians, for instance, are the only place to get chainmail or longbows, I think, or broadswords. And then there's the operatives, the special ops guys. They got the best armor. They got helmets that give them heads-up displays with night vision goggles. They've got great guns. All their stuff's top-notch. And there's a few others, but yeah, I wanted there to be some cool items in there that are not just everyday things that, you know, are the equivalent of magic items. So that's what that stuff's for.
So whenever I first started playing the game, it was very close to what we've got now, but there were the 4 main traits, and then each one had 4 skills under it. But right now there's the 3 skills and the 1 instinct underneath of it. What made you want to switch that up?
Back then, you could increase the total amount of skill points you have by spending XP on a particular ability, and then you could, you know, eventually, if you live long enough, max out every skill that you had. And I didn't like that. I wanted to change that whole system and make it more like you have a set amount of intelligence. That's your mental resources that you can spread across all of the possible things you can learn. And you can reassign skill points over time depending on what you prioritize. And in my own life, as I've gotten older, that's how I think it probably actually works. That you forget things you haven't done for a while, you practice new stuff. If your interests change again, you kind of forget about the old stuff and start getting way into the new things. And it's just whatever you keep using, you know, day after day is what you're good at. And when I made that change, I wanted to keep the ×6 multiplier for brains. Your brains ×6 is how many total skill points you have to spend. And that's too thin when you try to spread it across 16 different skills. And also, again, I'm kind of neurotic about trying to keep everything in some multiple of 6. So dropped it down to 12 skills. That gave better average numbers, made the players more capable. The player that you're playing, or the character that you're playing in Apocalyptia, is not an average person that is just wandering around. It's assumed that you're slightly better than average because you've survived. You're an average survivor, not an average idiot walking down the street. And so I wanted those people to be capable. And this game didn't have anything that was akin to like saving throws or anything back then. And so it looked pretty clear to me when I looked across the skills which ones I could pop out. What were things that were more like just natural talents that flow from, you know, your inborn abilities, your traits, and what would come off of that. And so that's what athletics, that's what stealth, perception, and socialize kind of are. And then there's much more specific cases that are skills that you focus on and get really good at that stuff. So I don't know, part of it was a game balance thing. Part of it, probably the biggest part of it, was I just wanted to get away from the power fantasy crawl in most role-playing games of, if I can survive long enough and farm enough XP, then I can get awesome at everything, and then nobody can stop. But no, that's not real.
Since I've been playing, there have been several additions, but the only major change that I've experienced is the switching of the parent trait for survival and build. For 2 years, I had this idea in my head of the archetype for a brains-heavy character. You'd be good at medicine, build back then, and science. And you could do amazing things with those. You'd probably be rather squishy, but all that said, it was an archetype that I knew very well. And it took a bit of adjusting, and I'm still not totally used to it, when you switched survival and build. Build is now under con, and survival is now under brains. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Part of it was when I first had build, electronics was under build, and I changed that, put that under science, and then it never sat right with me having survival under constitution. I know D&D does it that way, but most stuff involving survival is knowing things, knowing what plants you can eat, knowing what things are, medicinal, what you can make a balm out of or whatever, how to make a shelter, how to tell time, tell weather, whatever. All that stuff is just a series of facts, knowledge that you have, and it doesn't really have anything to do with how tough you are. Meanwhile, build, though there is stuff to learn, the kinds of things that you're doing with build, it's basically just, fabrication stuff. And I've worked with enough guys to know that it doesn't take a whole lot of smarts to know how to, weld, use a hammer, whatever you're doing, power tools, that kind of stuff. It's more like, do I have the physical endurance to sit here and, bash myself against the metal until it's a shape that I want it to be? So that's what I was going with there. It's just a change in the specialties that push me in that direction, and I feel like it's more balanced now. I mean, the stupidest people I've ever met in my life have worked in some kind of fabrication shop and build things all day. So it just made sense to me.
I like that drive is under con as well. Very early on, I was like, that doesn't make any sense. Drive should be under, a dexterity or agility. And then I thought about it, and no, not really. If you have the endurance to go on an 11-hour drive somewhere, that has nothing to do with how dexterous you are. That is all about ability to stay awake, ability to not get cramped in the seat, manhandle that 18-wheeler, whatever it is.
Even in, racing, NASCAR and Formula One and stuff, especially in, Formula One stuff, it's young dudes that work out like fighter pilots, and, they're whipping around the wheel, they're dealing with the G's, they're still, keeping things under control. It's a serious workout that these people are doing, trying to make this machine do what you want. So yeah, there's a good case to be made for several different things being used as parent attributes in place of other stuff, and that's why I put in that ability that lets you do that. But I think by default, I've got it pretty close. I'm happy with it.
So this is kind of going to be our segue. It's particularly in the settlement section, but also broken up within the different human enemies. There are a bunch of different factions presented. Why did you choose those particular groups of people and decide what made you decide that Raiders are a faction and Amazons are a faction, but I don't know, is there a communist faction?
Yeah.
Okay.
Guerrillas.
Kyle.
Well,
Kitty played communist faction, didn't you?
Well, we were mercenaries, whom had a bit of love for Soviet Russia, but I don't necessarily think we were communists. I don't know. I think we used Raiders as
you rolled mercenaries for that one.
Okay, so they are in the book then.
Yeah,
in that game, we also had punks as a faction, which is pretty cool.
my chosen faction were traders, but after I started actually building the faction, I realized they were definitely scavengers rather than raiders, or rather than traders.
I think it's hilarious that your faction was traders. Because every single time you say it, it's like, my faction was traders. And I'm like, yes, they were.
Well, there was a lot of betraying going on
my
there.
faction was the only one left in the settlement at the end because everybody else abandoned
Oh yeah,
us.
Varys, you had the realm at heart.
So, Jordan, do you want to say anything more about the factions, how you chose which factions to make, and in your mind, what differentiated a faction from just a random person?
Okay, yeah. Just like this game was kind of intentionally designed to look a lot like 80s role-playing games, the material that I was looking at was a lot of 80s post-apocalyptic movies for a lot of the inspiration. You've got a lot of great movies since the zombie thing in the 21st century and all, but the core of it was, Mad Max and all that kind of stuff from back when. And so there are always recurring archetypes in those movies. So I wanted to represent each one of them that represented a group of people as best as I could. So you got, your Amazons, your cannibals and cultists and, raiders and stuff. Those are pretty standard. But then other ones, what I was really wanting to do was kind of imagine how humans would group together in response to society falling apart, and think about all the different directions that people might go with that. And so a lot of these factions are, identity based. You got the Amazons that are, battle feminists, basically. You've got the Aryan white supremacist guys. You got, gangstas. You got all these different people that are just there by virtue of who they are, basically. And then you've got other ones that are more ideological in nature. The traders are, hyper-capitalists. The guerrillas are communists. Punks are anarchists. I wanted to think about all of the different ways that a person could approach how they're wanting to build society again. Because each one of them has some kind of agenda. They want to be the ones that build society anew. And along with that theme, I really like having acronyms in the traits. So, like, for the base character, you got agility, brains, constitution, demeanor, ABCD. That's your foundational thing as the character. When I redid the factions, they've got population, resolve, intel, strength, and mobility, prism. So I was like, all right, you take a human being and think of all the whole spectrum of what they could turn into. Prism seemed like a reasonable thing to use for that.
You're a nerd.
Yeah, no shit.
I've never realized that about factions. That's cool. I've never realized that.
Thanks. But yeah, that's what I was trying to do. And also, like, part of it is me dealing with, like, what I would like to see in the future. And none of these factions are right. None of these factions have the answer. Some of them are really fucked up, and, some of them are a little better than others, but, none of them really have the plan, and they've all got to kind of work together, or most of them anyway, to make anything out of it. So that struggle is kind of the late game that I hope to see in Apocalyptia games. Is you start with interpersonal conflict, and then it becomes, a conflict of ideas as to, who's going to carry the day.
So you're saying that the cannibals don't have the right answer?
They've got a few things in line. I mean, they are definitely selfless and driven and fearless, so there's probably something to learn from about all of them.
All right. I'm going to be ending this episode here before we actually get into talking about the Apocalyptia Factions game, because holy shit, we talked for a long time about it. And I feel like there really wasn't much in the way of gaming advice given during our incessant droning. At this time, I don't know when I'll be releasing our Remembrances of the Factions game. Now, with that said, I'm done with this bullshit. I need to start prepping for my next game. This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons Attribution No Derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.